Navy SEALs carried in by Special Operations helicopters took over the oil tanker known as the Bella 1 in a daring at-sea mission off the coast of Iceland.
The operation was carried out by the US Coast Guard and US military with support from the UK's Ministry of Defence and came.
The White House made clear this is now criminal territory.
On January 7th, 2026, US forces carried out a major maritime operation, capturing a Russian-flagged oil tanker in the North Atlantic after a weeks-long pursuit across thousands of miles. The ship, known as the Marinera, had tried to slip through an American blockade on sanctioned oil shipments by changing its name, flag and course. Just after Venezuela's leader Nicolas Maduro was taken into US custody on January 3rd, American forces intercepted this vessel and at least one other tanker linked to Venezuelan oil exports, adding to a growing number of seizures that now include at least 5 tankers in recent weeks. This move directly involves Russia, which had registered the tanker and reportedly sent naval units, including a submarine, to protect it. Moscow has protested the boarding as a breach of international law, even as US Southern Command used helicopters and Navy assets to secure control of the ship. On a global scale, the incident has immediate effects on oil markets and international diplomacy. Ships tied to sanctions now make up a significant share of the world's tanker fleet, with US and allied enforcement actions targeting networks moving hundreds of millions of barrels of oil each year. So what is Washington trying to achieve with this naval action? Officials say this is part of a broader effort to enforce sanctions, disrupt black market oil transport, and cut off revenue streams feeding Caracas and its partners. And how will this affect relations between the US, Russia, and the wider energy market? Tensions are rising, and this confrontation could influence how countries handle sanctions, shipping routes, and diplomatic negotiations in the months ahead. Keep watching as we uncover the details of this high seas clash, what it means for global oil supplies, and how world powers are reacting to this unfolding crisis. Russian officials say the US tanker seizures are unlawful after Washington confirmed it boarded and took control of at least 2 vessels. Russia's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova described the blockade and seizures as acts of piracy and banditry, based on official Russian statements and international reports. Russia's transport ministry said US forces boarded 1 tanker and communication was lost afterward, calling the action a breach of maritime law. The foreign ministry added that the vessel was sailing in international waters and was nowhere near the US coastline when it was tracked. Russia says the ship was flying a Russian flag and operating legally. US officials argue the operation was part of sanctions enforcement. Russia insists there was no legal justification to use force against a foreign-registered ship and refers to international maritime law under the UNCLOS framework. The Foreign Ministry also warned that the confrontation could lead to unpredictable outcomes and called for restraint. Russian officials say they plan to contest the seizures through legal and diplomatic routes. A Russian lawmaker condemned the seizure as unlawful, according to state media, though this claim cannot be independently confirmed. Officials argue that maritime enforcement should be handled through joint international mechanisms rather than by one country acting alone. Russia says US court warrants have no authority on the high seas. Washington maintains that the seizures are legitimate actions tied to sanctions. Russian state media insist the tanker was operating within the law. US statements and tracking data have been cited by media outlets to justify the seizure. Some reports describe heavy US surveillance and a large-scale operation, though details about aircraft and special forces involvement have not been independently verified. Moscow describes US sanctions as illegitimate, arguing they are meant to control global energy flows. Russia has suggested taking the issue to the International Maritime Organization and the United Nations to seek wider discussion on maritime security. Its response has gone beyond formal protests. US officials and major media outlets have reported that Russian naval vessels, including a submarine, were present in the area, though key details remain disputed. The Russian Transport Ministry has officially demanded that the United States stop targeting Russian tankers. Reports suggest Venezuela has considered providing naval escorts for some shipments. There is no confirmed information about troops being placed on board vessels. Russian commentators say monitoring has increased, but independent verification is limited. This reported military angle makes the tanker dispute far more dangerous. The Kremlin has pointed to its strategic relationship with Venezuela and says it continues to support Caracas as tensions rise. Moscow has denied claims that it is evacuating diplomatic staff from Venezuela. After earlier seizures near Venezuelan waters, Russia had already demanded explanations from Washington. The foreign minister stated that matters involving drug trafficking and maritime security should be handled collectively, not by one nation alone. Moscow rejected US claims that the tankers were linked to foreign terrorist groups, calling those accusations excuses for exploitation. Over recent months, international media have reported multiple interceptions and pursuits, increasing tension in the region. The pattern of confrontation has grown stronger. The situation appears to be worsening. Russia has filed diplomatic protests and reports of nearby naval activity continue, a mix that analysts warn could increase the chance of serious mistakes. Moscow says it will continue using legal and diplomatic paths to challenge the seizures. The Kremlin repeats its support for Venezuela despite US pressure, while Russian officials warn of uncertain outcomes. The tanker seizures are no longer just about economics, they now represent a possible flashpoint. Both sides are hardening their positions. Neither appears ready to step back. The danger grows with each passing day. The United States has seized a large oil tanker linked to Venezuela's sanctioned oil trade. The Marinera, a supertanker capable of carrying huge volumes of crude, was taken in the North Atlantic. The interception occurred in waters between Iceland and the United Kingdom. The vessel was flying a Russian flag and was directly connected to Venezuelan oil exports. It had been under US monitoring for several weeks. The seizure marks a serious escalation in Washington's campaign against what it calls the Dark Fleet. The Marinera has a notable past. It previously sailed under the name Bella 1. Under that identity, it had already been sanctioned by the United States for transporting Venezuelan crude. It was also connected to shipments of Iranian oil, another restricted trade. The vessel later changed its name, a common method used by ships trying to avoid identification and sanctions, but US agencies continued tracking it. The new name offered no protection. American forces knew exactly which ship they were targeting. The location of the interception matters. The Marinera was seized in the North Atlantic between Iceland and the United Kingdom. This suggests the tanker may have been heading toward European buyers. Another possibility is that it was preparing for a ship-to-ship transfer at sea. Either way, the route placed it far from Venezuelan waters. The operators likely believed that distance would protect them. That assumption proved wrong. US forces showed they can intercept dark fleet tankers far from their point of origin, anywhere across the globe. The seizure of the Marinera did not happen on impulse. US forces had been watching the tanker for several weeks. Intelligence teams followed its route across international waters. Satellites and surveillance aircraft tracked its location throughout the journey. The interception point and timing were selected with care. This was a coordinated mission backed by strong intelligence. Once the conditions were right, US units moved in. The ship was boarded and taken under control. The Marinera is classified as a supertanker. Ships in this category rank among the largest vessels at sea. A single supertanker can transport more than 2 million barrels of crude oil. At today's prices, that amount is valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. Taking control of a vessel like this delivers a serious financial hit. It is not only about losing one cargo load, it also disrupts the entire supply route connected to it. The Marinera used common shadow fleet methods to bypass sanctions. These methods are widely known, yet they remain difficult to stop. Ships often disable their transponders, so they cannot be tracked by maritime systems. They perform ship-to-ship transfers in open waters, shifting oil between vessels to hide where it came from. Frequent changes of flags make records harder to follow. Name changes, such as Bella 1 becoming Marinera, create confusion around identity. Fake paperwork about cargo and destination is routine. Many of these vessels register under flags of convenience from countries with little oversight. Even with all these tactics in place, US forces were still able to follow and intercept the Marinera. Before the seizure, the Marinera was already under US sanctions. It had been officially listed for transporting Venezuelan oil in violation of American restrictions. It was also connected to Iranian oil, which is subject to even tighter sanctions. The operators knew their actions broke US law. They continued anyway, depending on the dark fleet system to avoid consequences. They believed the financial reward outweighed the danger. That judgment collapsed on January 7th. The seizure of the Marinera is part of a wider pattern. Similar actions had already taken place in the weeks before. In December 2025, the United States seized the skipper near the Venezuelan coast. That operation marked the start of a more aggressive campaign. The Venezuelan government reacted immediately, calling the seizure piracy. Washington ignored the criticism and continued with its actions. Caracas has repeatedly voiced anger over these operations. After the skipper incident, Venezuelan officials once again accused the United States of piracy. That word carries legal weight. Under international law, piracy refers to the unlawful seizure of ships on open seas. Venezuela claims the US actions fit this definition. Washington completely rejects that claim. American officials say their actions are legal and are tied to sanctions enforcement and counter-narcotics missions. The legal argument continues, but the seizures continue as well. The skipper was not the only tanker detained in December. Other sanctioned vessels, including the Sentries, were held starting December 10th. These ships were also accused of moving Venezuelan oil in violation of sanctions. The pattern is clear. December saw the first operations that set the example. January brought the capture of the Marinera, a massive supertanker operating far from Venezuelan waters. The pace of operations is rising, and the scale is growing. The military presence behind these actions is extensive. The aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford has been deployed to the Caribbean. This ship is one of the most advanced in the US Navy. Its presence offers air support, surveillance strength, and strong deterrence. The carrier strike group includes several escort ships, destroyers, cruisers, and supply vessels. This represents a serious display of US naval strength in the region. The arrival of the Gerald Ford is part of a wider build-up. Coast Guard cutters are now more active across Caribbean waters. Navy destroyers and cruisers patrol major shipping routes. Surveillance aircraft track vessel activity across large areas. This build-up serves several goals. It backs operations against the dark fleet. It gives support for tanker seizures like the Marinera. It also sends a clear warning to Venezuela and its partners. These actions fall under a named military campaign. Operation Southern Spear is aimed at shutting down illegal trade across the Western Hemisphere. The mission targets multiple types of smuggling. Oil shipments from sanctioned countries such as Venezuela, Russia, and Iran are a main focus. Drug trafficking is also targeted under the same mission structure. The goal is to disrupt illegal trade across the region on a large scale. The Marinera seizure fits directly within this plan. Operation Southern Spear reflects a wider strategy. The Trump administration has placed strong focus on control within the Western Hemisphere. This includes military actions such as the recent capture of President Maduro. It also includes heavy economic pressure through strict sanctions enforcement, along with maritime operations against the dark fleet. These actions are linked together as part of a single coordinated approach. The seizure of the Marinera is one piece within a much broader effort. To understand this situation, it helps to understand the dark fleet. This term refers to a group of aging tankers used to bypass international sanctions. These ships transport oil from countries like Venezuela, Russia, and Iran. Each of these nations faces heavy limits on oil exports. The dark fleet allows them to continue selling oil despite those restrictions. The vessels operate quietly, avoid detection, change identities, and use fake paperwork. They are the system that keeps sanctioned oil moving into global markets. For Venezuela, the dark fleet is a financial lifeline. US sanctions have severely limited the country's ability to sell oil through normal channels. Major shipping companies avoid Venezuelan crude. International banks refuse to process payments tied to sanctioned oil. Insurance firms will not cover the cargo. The dark fleet provides a workaround for all of this. It allows Venezuela to earn income despite restrictions. Disrupting this fleet directly hits government revenue. Each seized tanker means millions of dollars lost. Russia has reacted with anger to these operations. Moscow accused Washington of state piracy after the tanker seizures. Russian officials say the United States is unlawfully taking ships in international waters. They argue this violates basic principles of maritime law. More importantly, reports suggest Russia is exploring the idea of using military escorts. This could mean Russian warships accompanying tankers to discourage US interception. That would greatly increase the risk of direct confrontation. The idea of Russian naval escorts is serious. If Moscow sends warships to protect dark fleet tankers, the situation becomes far more dangerous. Any attempt by US forces to stop a tanker guarded by Russian vessels could lead to a direct clash. Neither side claims to want open conflict, yet neither side appears willing to step back. This possible escalation is now being openly discussed in both capitals. With every new seizure, the risk continues to grow. The White House strongly defends these operations. Officials connect the tanker seizures to anti-drug efforts. They claim that money from Venezuelan oil sales supports drug networks. They also point to corruption as a reason for strict enforcement. The official position is that these seizures are meant to disrupt criminal activity, not legitimate business. Venezuela is described by US officials as a narco state whose oil income supports illegal operations. Venezuela and Russia reject this claim completely. They view the seizures as theft disguised as law enforcement. The Venezuelan government tells a very different story. Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has tied the tanker seizures to a wider pattern of hostile actions. She connects them to the recent military strike on Venezuelan territory. She also links them to the kidnapping of President Maduro and First Lady Cilia Flores, and to what she describes as an organized campaign to steal Venezuelan oil. In this version of events, the seizures are proof that economic warfare is still in motion. Rodriguez presents the seizures as clear evidence of US intentions. She says Washington is trying to force political change in Venezuela. According to her, tanker seizures are one tactic, military force is another, the arrest of Maduro is another. The goal, according to Caracas, is control of Venezuela's oil. This narrative casts Venezuela as a target of foreign aggression across economic, military, and political fronts. The government is also using these events to build national unity. The seizures are framed as attacks on the entire population, not just political leaders. The message encourages solidarity against outside pressure. Economic sufferings blamed on US actions rather than domestic policy. Venezuelans are told that hardship comes from Washington's blockade, not from decisions made in Caracas. The disruption of the Dark Fleet feeds directly into this message. At the same time, Rodriguez claims the economy is improving. She has spoken publicly about growth despite sanctions. This message serves a political purpose at home. It suggests the country can survive external pressure. It portrays the government as successfully resisting foreign power. The tanker seizures complicate this message. Every seized ship cuts real oil income. The gap between official claims and everyday economic conditions continues to widen. The real-world impact of these seizures is serious. Each captured tanker represents tens of millions of dollars in lost earnings. The oil cargo is taken by US authorities. The vessel may be sold or destroyed. Crew members face possible legal trouble. Beyond that, the operations create fear across the entire Dark Fleet. Other operators now face much higher risk. Insurance becomes more expensive. Crews are harder to find. Routes grow more dangerous. These actions are creating a chilling effect throughout the network. Operators now have to weigh the danger of interception. Some may refuse to transport Venezuelan oil at all. Others may demand higher fees to offset the risk. Routes may become longer and more costly. The entire supply chain that supports Venezuela's oil exports is being disrupted. This outcome matches Washington's stated goal. These operations signal a new stage in how sanctions are enforced. Earlier administrations focused mostly on financial punishment. Individuals and companies were sanctioned. Assets were frozen. Access to banking systems was cut. Direct seizure of ships on the open sea was uncommon. Now, the US is physically taking vessels on the water. This marks a clear shift in strategy. The legal grounds for these actions remain disputed. Maritime law usually protects ships in international waters. The US claims that vessels without a valid flag do not have that protection. It also argues that ships breaking sanctions lose legal status. Critics respond that the US is acting alone, taking on the role of prosecutor, judge, and enforcer. These legal fights will play out in courts and diplomatic talks. The seizures, however, continue. The seizure of the Marinera in the North Atlantic shows how far this effort reaches. Operations are not limited to the Caribbean. US forces are tracking ships across vast ocean regions. The interception between Iceland and the UK sends a message. No tanker in the Dark Fleet is safe, no matter the route. Distance from Venezuela offers no safety. US intelligence and naval reach can operate almost anywhere. The Marinera case fits within President Trump's broader approach. His policy toward Venezuela involves multiple pressure points at once: military action, the arrest of Maduro, financial sanctions that limit trade, and maritime operations that target alternative export routes. All tools are being used together. The aim is total pressure from every direction. Venezuela is being pushed politically, economically, and now physically at sea. The next phase remains uncertain. Will Russia act on its threats to provide armed escorts? Will Dark Fleet operators continue to take the risk? Can Venezuela survive on its remaining oil income? These questions will be answered over time. What is clear is that the campaign against the Dark Fleet is still active. The Marinera will not be the final seizure. More ships are likely to be taken. The pattern is clear. The US has launched a full campaign against Venezuela's Dark Fleet. If you found this video eye-opening, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts on this global crisis, and subscribe to stay updated on the latest international developments. Don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss an alert on breaking news like this.